Good morning, everyone. If we could settle in and we can get started. So just to start on logistics, for interpretation, it's under the little, what is this, a table thing? Whatever it's called. Pretend you're in school. It's under the thing there, and that'll be the interpretation. Voila, there it is, yes. Okay, great. Good morning. My name is Michael Fakhri. I'm the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, and it's my pleasure. I'm just going to take a moment. There's people still looking for interpretation. Flip up the table thing on your side, and it'll be under it. This is technology. This is what we're talking about. It always works. It's always equitable. Okay, everyone's good? Bueno, here we go. It's my pleasure and honor to facilitate today's conversation on data governance in digitalization of the food systems. The context of our conversation today in some ways has to do with the CFS, the draft CFS policy recommendations on strengthening collection and use of food security and nutrition data and related analysis tools to improve decision-making in support of the progressive realization of the right to adequate food in the context of national food security. But that's just the beginning of the conversation. We're going to share our experiences to some degree. I'll just start with introducing how the negotiations went. But this is one of the most important issues, I think, of our times within food systems. So the conversation will be about digitalization, data, and food systems more broadly. We're adjusting our schedule a little bit just in light of technical challenges and people's schedule today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to allow the speakers to introduce themselves, and we'll get to it. So what I'll do is I'll just introduce some of the ideas that we're talking about. So I have to be honest, this is an area that I'm still learning a lot about. And so I'm just going to use this opportunity to share with you what I've been learning. What's interesting to me is often people will talk about a data gap. We must bridge the data gap, as if there's some ideal version of data, this ideal version of what data is and what we need, and we all need to catch up to this invented ideal. I think a more productive way to think of data is not something we collect. Data is something we produce. Data is a way of understanding the world. It's not just reflecting or measuring the world. It's a way of understanding how, the world, and it's a way of actually shaping and creating the world. So while we're producing data, we're actually producing the world we want to live in. And sometimes the challenge with data is sometimes people treat data as a raw resource, and then we have to process it to give it context. In reality, data has its own context, but it's often in the background. So people create data, people create technology, people create digital technology. And with that comes people's assumptions, prejudices, racism, sexism, all the different biases we all have. But with data, sometimes it's hard to see that. So that's one way to think of data. What's also interesting to me is during the negotiations, I think from a human rights community, we got a lot of victories. So some good things about the draft policy tool that we have coming before us this week is the definition of data. I think the definition of data is more open and nuanced than in other places. Governance is in there to some degree, but maybe not as much as it could be. And I'll talk a little bit more about governance. And we got a human rights approach in there, and it's in the title. So we have a foothold in there. I wouldn't say it's a human rights approach to data by any means. I think the conversation we're having on data here in the CFS is the beginning to bring in the whole UN system. Right now, within the UN, through the Secretary General's office, there's talk of trying to negotiate a global compact on digitalization, which means that the world understands we need some mechanism to govern data on a global basis. So the conversations we're having in the CFS, I would say, are one of the earliest conversations on this topic, not just in food systems, but within the UN system broadly. So let's treat this moment as a beginning and not an end. What do I mean by governance? Why do I keep talking? Why is it important? So governance raises questions about who will collect and analyze the data, who produces it, how will they do it, what mechanisms of accountability will be in place, and who will the analysis primarily serve? It's what I'm seeing is data and digitalization is everywhere, and it creates a very particular value, but it's not value that's created from actual work. What it is companies are turning more and more aspects of our everyday life, they're turning it into data. We are now all content, right? We're now all going to be on social media, and then these social media companies are going to make money off of us somehow that I'm still trying to understand. We're all right now producing value for somebody else somewhere else. Where are they? Who are they? What am I getting from this? Right? So this is why governance is important. Take maybe just 2 more minutes. So what I find frustrating is that policymakers and experts and companies will promote data collection and analysis, but there's no robust governance regime nationally or internationally. And that's just opening the door for exploitation. That's just opening the door for imperial plunder. Come into our country and extract more resources, as if that doesn't sound familiar to many of us. And then companies will promise countries, if you let us in, we'll give you the best technology, we'll give you free technology, we'll give you and we'll give and we'll give. But there's no reason to trust the private sector in this regard. And we can look at our experiences with social media. All these promises that were made with social media are proving to be more problematic than people imagined in the beginning. Let me stop there. So that's just a sort of introduction just to get us into the mindset. Just to give you, what we're going to do is we're going to start with Muayyad Bisharat, who's in the West Bank, because we're worried about the internet connection, amongst other things, about our worries of our friends and brothers and sisters in Palestine. And then we'll turn it to the ambassador, who might have to step out early. So it'll go Muayyad, Taina, and then the ambassador, and then Patty, and then Victor. I'm just using first names, but they'll introduce themselves properly, all protocols observed, etc., etc. But with that, we'll turn it to Muayyad.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Thank you for everyone. I'm Muayyad Bisharat from occupied Palestinian territories. I'm working with the Union of Agricultural Work Committees, one of the organizations working in agriculture sector in Palestine. Also, we are part of the CSIBM and La Via Campesina. So I want to give like a key issue for Palestinian food system. First of it is the restriction. I hear my sound echo.
There's an echo. I'm not sure for technical. Who do I turn to? Maybe Muayyad, maybe take off the earphones.
Okay.
Try that. Yalla, go ahead, Muayyad. Oh, now he froze. The picture's frozen. We'll give it maybe 1 more minute. Okay, maybe while we're waiting to get Muayyad back on, I'll turn it to Taina. Taina, of course, please introduce yourself.
Muy buenos días, soy Taina Edman, del pueblo indígena Cuna de Panamá. Estamos aquí como parte del mecanismo de la sociedad civil, de parte del comité coordinador. Bueno, aquí vamos a hablar bajo nuestras experiencias y empiezo reafirmando que los pueblos indígenas hemos sido custodios de datos de nuestros conocimientos ancestrales que han sido registrados y protegidos para el cuidado de nuestra madre tierra, de nosotros, de los pueblos del mundo. La digitalización de los sistemas alimentarios afecta nuestras vidas como pueblos indígenas a nivel individual y colectivo. Me refiero al modo en que se recopilan, almacenan, utilizan, conectan y analizan los datos. Por eso se deben incluir protecciones que limiten el uso indebido de la información indígena por parte de los individuos no indígenas. Esto lo decimos porque hemos tenido la experiencia, por lo menos, del COVID. Cuando el COVID estalló en nuestros países, por lo menos hablo del pueblo Cuna, hubo un cerco sanitario en donde nadie entraba y nadie salía. Entonces, a nosotros tener esta protección de nuestras informaciones, nuestros conocimientos tradicionales y ancestrales, pudimos trabajar en conjunto, colectivamente, en el intercambio de la alimentación. Los jóvenes volvieron a la siembra, las mujeres, los hombres, todos trabajaron en el campo. O sea, estas semillas que hemos custodiado, todos estos conocimientos en términos medicinales, los conocimientos en términos de conocer nuestros hermanos, los árboles, por nosotros los pueblos indígenas, tenemos a la madre tierra como nuestra familia. Para nosotros no es un objeto no vivo, es vivo. O sea, ellos son los que nos alimentan, ellos son los que nos dan para vivir, ellos son los que nos dan todo. Si nosotros entregamos nuestros datos sin limitaciones, los extraen, se los llevan, los patentizan y luego nos los devuelven a precios y que no lo podemos utilizar porque ya son de ellos. O sea, todo eso es un tema muy, muy delicado para nosotros como pueblos indígenas. Por eso nos referimos también mucho a la Declaración de las Naciones Unidas sobre los Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas, que reflejan los derechos inherentes de los pueblos y naciones indígenas a la soberanía de la información. Y por consiguiente, nos referimos a todos los artículos en toda su colectividad y no de uno a uno. También nos referimos al artículo 45 que dice, nada de lo contenido en lo presente o en la presente declaración se interpretará en el del sentido de que menoscaba o suprime los derechos que los pueblos indígenas tienen en la actualidad o puedan adquirir en el futuro. ¿Por qué? Porque está el consentimiento libre, previo, informado para nosotros, que es sumamente importante y que en la experiencia de estas negociaciones hemos tenido que un retroceso de muchos años después de esta declaración, que cada vez que mencionamos este CLPI, nos dicen que tiene que ser según proceda. Creo que esto es una parte que debería respetarse para nosotros como pueblos indígenas. Por lo tanto, a nivel de toda esta experiencia, pongo como reflexión cómo nosotros damos nuestros datos y que debemos hacernos estas preguntas. ¿Por qué los quieren? ¿Para qué lo necesitan? ¿Quién será el responsable de su resguardo y protección? Por eso, para nosotros, la importancia de la gobernanza, porque por medio de la gobernanza nosotros podemos fortalecer estas necesidades de protección. Yo les pregunto, si yo voy a sus casas y entro y abro su nevera, tomo sus comidas, me meto a sus habitaciones, ¿cómo ustedes se van a sentir? ¿Cómo ustedes van a pensar de nosotros? ¿Cómo van a reaccionar? Creo que su reacción sería, ¿qué hacen ustedes aquí? ¿Qué tocas mis cosas sin mi consentimiento? Es lo mismo que pedimos nosotros como pueblos indígenas. Entrar preguntando si nosotros damos el consentimiento del uso de nuestros datos. porque esto es la digitalización es muy delicada y se utiliza para todo. Es como dijo Facri. Utilizan los datos, estamos en las redes sociales, nos están grabando, esto es lo que dicen, es lo que contienen en sus comunidades, en sus poblaciones, y con esto trabajamos y después, ¿qué va a pasar para nosotros? Eso se lo dejo en la mesa, por qué la importancia para nosotros de la gobernanza. Gracias.
Thank you, Tangana. Before I turn it over to Patty, I just wanted to, since we're lucky to have representatives from South Africa and Mexico, just to plant the question in your mind. Actually, I'll just turn it to you right now, Ambassador. Over to you.
Thank you, moderator. Good morning to all of you, and both the CSIPM and I think there's private sector representatives here and a few also country representatives. I appreciate the kind invitation that I make the remarks in this timely event on data governance. As South Africa, we appreciate the value of a discussion and on data governance in the context of ensuring food security, combating poverty, and advancing sustainable agriculture. Therefore, we must collaborate to expedite the transformation of our agri-food systems towards the realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So there are questions that were raised, and I would have liked to listen more to the presentations from CSIPM. But having listened both this morning from Michael and Tiana, I think we are acknowledging that in general we have the data guidelines that the CS, now I'm coming back to your name, the current conference, which is the supposed to approve or at least agree to their implementation, and we have already reflected on the process of developing the guidelines, which was in itself a difficult process, but it also reflected the tensions that exist in respect of what is the understanding of data and how it should be utilized and how it should be managed. So, and I think we are all driven, firstly, by the need to have data that will ensure efficiency of agri-food systems, which are significantly impacted by both inequalities and other physical factors. And there is an acknowledgement of the inequitable distribution of resources and opportunities, which tend to restrict access and understanding of what the essential inputs are in the process, even including how we utilize technology and human capital. So especially in specific regions where farmers and smallholder farmers in the regions are practicing. And I will just jump into what moderator then I will reflect on in our understanding of the role of data governance. It is to promote the transformation in the agriculture and agro-processing sectors, which is directly aligned with food systems intent, and therefore accelerating the opening of the markets and providing better access and conditions for all affected groups is of paramount importance. Data governance, therefore, should be enhancing competitiveness and entrepreneurial opportunities through technology and innovation, infrastructure development, and digitization. Creation of effective farmer support and agro-processing incentives would facilitate decent and inclusive employment and improve working conditions. And I just want to draw one example from my country, South Africa, where we had utilized plants, indigenous plants or naturally occurring plants for medicinal purposes. And we have a legal framework which is referred to access and benefit sharing. It is about how you acknowledge indigenous knowledge to enable innovation, and therefore through the whole value chain, there is a benefit that goes back to those indigenous knowledge holders. So these governance systems would therefore be systems and approaches that have to be implemented by us as member states in this regard, and in our countries working together with civil society and the private sector to create the environment. And it is our understanding, or my understanding in the South African situation, that private sector requires more predictability of exactly how then to factor in the governance framework, what then they would have to be committed to continuously recognize in terms of both their pricing strategy as well as how they enable the flow of the resources. Because at times there are all these other informal or allegations that our systems as traditional knowledge holders is not organized sufficiently to be able to then in the value chains be able to provide for those benefits to flow to those right holders. Therefore, we need to be sure in terms of exactly what is the unit that we refer to when we say civil society, in the context of a national and as well as a local sphere of a state. And it is in those processes that I think the guidelines give effect to what then is required to be recognized, and what you have provided for as all of us out of negotiations as a definition in terms of that Article 45, that we should bear in mind that we are not going to undermine both in promoting the right to food using data, but also making sure that the benefits, there is recognition of traditional knowledge holders. And it's a complex process, but I think it is something that that is achievable. And lastly, I think part of what we also have to bear in mind, which I think is also an opportunity from these guidelines, is providing young people with access to resources, again, for entrepreneurial training, which could also enable them to act as change agents in the agri-food systems, promoting both economic growth as well as food security. So we have to make sure that our youth is quite understanding why we have the intent first of all of right to food, and therefore how that links to the whole value chain or the improvement and transformation of the agri-food systems, wherein there is a reflection of the voices that emanate from the traditional knowledge holders, and therefore put a price to at least benefit those traditional knowledge holders. And finally, I think the CFS policy recommendations on data collection and use, which will again be adopted later this week, is not an end in itself, but merely a tool to advance the role of data in our quest to eradicate hunger. So the challenge is how these recommendations will be taken up by governments, as I was indicating in my earlier example, that it should be possible for governments to work with these guidelines in order to give effect to the improvement or transformation of food systems to eradicate hunger, and to facilitate, therefore, the implementation of the guidelines within the specific dynamics of each state and community. So it does, therefore, call upon all of us as members of CFS, as well as partners in CFS, to create a mechanism through which we are going to ensure that there is more awareness about the guidelines and what the intention is of the guidelines, and what, therefore, in the governance, what are the responsibilities that we have, both as communities, as the private sector, as well as government. And if we then respect and work within the guidelines, we should be able to advance to a greater extent our interest in terms of achieving the end to hunger and making sure that we really live up to the principles of attaining all members of society globally having access to food, which is the most fundamental right that should be respected by all states. So that is, in a nutshell, my reflection, and I would have liked to stay on. However, I have a commitment at 9 o'clock. But I will follow through on these because there would still be information available online. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador, and we really appreciate your time, and apologies for making you late for your next appointment. What I understand is I think we're going to be able to get Muayyad back, so we'll go to Muayyad, then Patty, then the Deputy Minister, Victor Suarez Carrera, so just to adjust the program accordingly. Muayyad, تفضل.
Hi again. I'm so sorry about the sound issue. This is one of the problems of the digitalization. Key issue of Palestinian food system. I will talk about some points about the food system in Palestine and according to the situation under occupation. First of it is the restriction imposed by the Israeli occupation on movement of people and goods between West Bank and Gaza Strip, particularly in the blockade of Gaza Strip over 17 years, and the continuation of Israeli military occupation of Palestinian lands. According to the United Nations General Assembly in 2022, the cost of the restriction imposed on Area C, which is the largest area and has the most valuable and natural resources, is estimated by $2.5 billion per year. Approximately, this is according to use of the data, approximately 30% of the population was living below the poverty line, according to the Palestinian statistics. As a result, the food insecurity situation is widespread and increasing, with almost 1/3 deemed food insecure in Western. More than 60% of households Gaza Strip moderated or severely food insecure. The dominance of Israeli occupation over agricultural land and natural resources has been affecting the territory's food system by limiting access to critical inputs, especially water. The scarce and vulnerable natural resources base limited availability of reliable and affordable energy sources, and the rising cost of inputs such as feed and fertilizers throughout the entire agri-food value chain have led to declining profitability. Nevertheless, thousands of Palestinian families find their source of livelihood in the agri-food system, and the agri-food sector are critical for food security and nutrition and the resilience of Palestinian households and communities. In this context, the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian government in the occupied territory undertook a strategic thinking process in recent years, which led to the formulation of national policy agenda and cross-sectorial national food and nutrition security policy. Another driver is the inadequate access to energy resources, especially in the Gaza Strip, which suffer from chronic electricity deficit. This undermines the introduction of modern techniques, including digitalization. Generally, data is not neutral, but has a political impact aspect because of some technologies improved by Israeli corporations and controlled by them. Corporations are already collecting enormous amounts of data on land, seeds, production system, risk assessment, consumer behavior, which affect small-scale producers. Also, sometimes the digitalization or the data is used by the occupying power for surveillance and making risks against people under occupation or war. For example, the Israeli occupation authorities use digitalization to monitor workers in the field of human rights and use a spy system such as Pegasus system to spy the mobiles and personal computers of workers in this field, especially in 6 institutions that Israeli laterally designated them on the terrorist list. Digitalization affecting food sovereignty in the occupied territories in particular because it gives superior ability to local authorities, companies, or occupying authorities and power, the ability to monitor and track the work of individuals working in the agriculture sector, especially small farmers and producers, and work to design investment that compete with them and remove them from the entire agricultural sector and make them in fragile economic situation. This is from my side. Over to you.
It's interesting to hear the 2 different perspectives that we just got, which is, data can be used in any way. One can use data as a, what we heard from the ambassador is a hopeful look at data. And then we heard from Ayad how data is used in the context of occupation, for surveillance, for oppression, for control. So the data in the food system is being used to control people. So data itself is not just a tool to govern, used to govern. How data is collected affects how people move, their ability to move, their ability to eat, their ability to relate to each other. What's interesting to me, and I don't think this policy tool we have before us allows us to articulate, so what does data look like for liberation is still an open question, and I don't think we have the policy tools or the language for that kind of thinking. Well, over to you, Patty.
Thank you. And thank you, Moyad, for joining us as you could. I would say Moyad did have a visa to come, but he was not allowed to leave his Palestine territory. Thank you. My name is Patty Naylor. I am a farmer, and I'm from the United States, the state of Iowa. I'm a member of Family Farm Defenders, National Family Farm Coalition, and I'm a proud member of the global peasant movement, La Via Campesina. My husband and I have a certified organic farm where we grow corn, soybeans, oats, hay, and we have an apple orchard. But around us and across millions of acres of the United States, only 2 crops are grown, corn and soybeans, mostly from genetically modified seeds, GMOs. These are used almost entirely to feed livestock in confinements or to produce biofuels. This is a very chemical intensive and capital intensive production method. We can see in my state and around the country that this model is destroying biodiversity, it's polluting and degrading soil, water, and air, and it's destroying rural communities as well. And I'd like to note that this is the production system that is being exported around the world. Please. Okay, anyway, technology, there we go. So I think why then would farmers do this if it's destroying their communities and the land that they cherish so much? There's two aspects that I say are responsible for locking in this destructive production system. There's a free market-based system where prices the farmers receive are set on a global scale with no relationship to the real costs of producing that crop. So it makes it financially risky for an individual farmer to try to grow something else. And the technologies now are being promoted with promises of higher yields and potential income from the misguided solutions to address climate change, such as carbon markets and climate smart initiatives. These are all data-based solutions. Excuse me. Farmers sometimes unknowingly are giving up data and their own knowledge to the corporations, thinking that these technologies are a benefit to them. And I would say believing the propaganda that they hear from these companies. They overlook, the farmers overlook the surveillance and privacy violations. They don't seem to see that their knowledge is being extracted, that family farmers will soon be replaced by lesser skilled workers managed through computers. They don't see that corporations are collecting vast amounts of data through sensors on farm equipment, apps on their cell phones, drones flying over their cropland, and satellite imagery, just to name a few. Data collection leads to economic and political power of the agribusiness and tech companies, and to the digitalization and corporate control of a global food system from production all the way to consumption. Data and digital technologies are a political issue. Moya just mentioned that as well. The narrative that is needed, the narrative that we hear is that this is the production system we need to feed the world. It actually normalizes this extractive system, and it negates the positive methods of food production developed through centuries, as we heard from Taina with indigenous knowledge, and more recently through agroecology practices. So I think that the reason we're here today is to talk about how we could have this conversation between governments and the people on the ground and really ask, what is it we need in our food system? What is it we need for food security and food sovereignty, and how could we work together to achieve that? Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. So we've had a really, I think, great overview of a lot of the challenges and around data and digitalization more broadly. So I just want to turn it over to Deputy Minister Victor Suarez, and maybe we can start the conversation about what governments can do. What can governments do in light of these challenges? And bringing in, of course, your own perspective from your country. Over to you.
Sí, muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos, a todas. En México tenemos un gobierno progresista, democrático, que tiene en el centro el bienestar de las personas con base en derechos humanos. Un tema al respecto es el acceso a tecnologías de información y comunicación. Como todos sabemos, en modelos neoliberales la desigualdad se profundiza, la exclusión de servicios y acceso a derechos es una constante. En este punto, el acceso a telecomunicaciones e Internet es evidente que solo ha estado concentrado en poblaciones urbanas de alto ingreso. En México, entonces, el 25% de la población vive en el medio rural, ocupando el 80% del territorio. en alrededor de 150,000 comunidades. La mayor parte de las comunidades rurales no tienen acceso a telecomunicaciones e Internet. Es por eso que el gobierno nuestro ha puesto en marcha un programa de telecomunicaciones e Internet para todos, principalmente en el medio rural, para lo cual se ha constituido una empresa del Estado llamada Telecomunicaciones e Internet para Todos, vinculada a la empresa de electricidad del Estado. El planteamiento nuestro es, en estos 6 años, que el 95% de las comunidades rurales de nuestro país tengan acceso a telecomunicaciones e Internet gratuito. Y para eso vamos avanzando y al día de hoy, de las 150,000 comunidades rurales, se han conectado 83,000. Vamos avanzando. Ese es el tema de acceso a los servicios. El sector privado jamás va a interesarse en proveer de infraestructura y servicios de acceso a la telecomunicación e Internet en las zonas rurales. No es negocio. La única manera es el compromiso del Estado para llevarlo a cabo en cumplimiento de un derecho constitucional que tenemos en nuestro país. Es el tema del acceso, pero hablando ya del uso de la tecnología, tenemos que ubicar que cada etapa de innovaciones tecnológicas que se han impulsado en agricultura han tenido como eje aumentar la desigualdad, aumentar el poder corporativo y aumentar el uso, el dominio de las tecnologías para control hegemónico de determinados países. Así tenemos la agricultura 1.0, agroquímicos, agricultura 2.0, agricultura transgénica, agricultura 3.0, climáticamente inteligente, agricultura 4.0, agricultura digital. Cada etapa ha habido una promesa de seguridad alimentaria para todos y derecho a la alimentación para todos, pero cada etapa ha representado una concentración mayor de poder en manos de las corporaciones, una mayor desigualdad, una mayor inseguridad alimentaria. Así que es el momento de cuestionar que en esta etapa que de nueva cuenta nos están prometiendo que con las tecnologías digitales, big data, robotización, inteligencia artificial, ahora sí vamos a resolver el problema de la inseguridad alimentaria mundial. Es otra falsa promesa. Por eso es importante tener 2 temas en mente en el debate. Uno, el acceso a tecnologías de telecomunicación, Internet para todos como un derecho. Y 2, ¿quién controla esa tecnología? El tema en este momento es asegurar una gobernanza con base en bienes públicos, en bienes comunes, no dejar que el mercado vuelva a controlar como una mercancía este nuevo sistema o ambiente de grandes datos. Por eso me parece muy importante el debate que se está llevando a cabo, porque de otra manera sí estaríamos avanzando a sistemas aún más monopólicos, pero profundizando desigualdad, dependencia, pero lo que es peor, como lo señaló nuestro compañero de Jordania, también la utilización de la tecnología digital para el control totalitario de las sociedades y de las vidas de las personas. Así que me parece de la mayor importancia que este debate se esté llevando a cabo y que esté impulsado por sociedad civil y gobiernos democráticos para poner, es la única manera de poner un contrapeso al control corporativo y autoritario en esta etapa de digitalización.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. So what we've heard is a lot of the challenges in different contexts, and we've started to hear different roles that governments can play. What we've heard is what's at stake is knowledge, access, people's everyday life. And what we've heard is one way government might play a role, learning from examples from Mexico, is first understand a lot of the infrastructure is what we're talking about. So people talk about technology, sometimes very much in market terms or as business opportunities. But if we treat it as infrastructure, as a common good, that shifts our understanding of what's at stake. What I'll do in the spirit of understanding how the internet works, I want to shift what remaining short time we have is the political question of what is to be done. And I'll start maybe with Muayyad and then open it up to the room, but give also the panelists an opportunity to weigh in. I think we have a good sense of the challenges based on our conversation today. So how do we deal with these challenges? How can we think about data also and digitalization and new technology more broadly as a tool that can be used to benefit people, to free people from hunger, which means to free people from oppression, from occupation, and from exploitation. And this is what I want to emphasize, and I said this yesterday. I don't want to talk about zero hunger anymore. I want to talk about freedom. So with that, let me open up the conversation.
Thank you. I want to focus in main 3 points. So what we can to do, information and data on a small producer and farmers must be limited to a specific category without being monopolized by one party at expense of another. Another point is the goal of collecting and digitalizing information must be known to all parties so that it is not used as a tool to attract a new investment that compete with the small producers and farmers and expel them from the agricultural sector. Digitalization should be not affect the food system existing in rural and Bedouin communities in Palestinian territory, and traditional production methods that preserve the environment and work to sustain natural resources. Governments should be use and open the field of digitalization or data to all working in the sector of information or data to be used for benefit of communities, especially rural communities and rural areas, to benefit them and to improve their situation, not to monopolize their source of income and livelihood. According to the occupation, like as all of you know, it's like the most maybe advanced technology used in the area in the region and in the Middle East is Israel, and they are produce always a technology in everything, especially in agriculture sector, and sometimes they're using the new advanced technologies or digitalization to control the farmer methods of cultivation, also to monopolize the agronomist, the working in the sector, to do what they have in their own strategy and policy, not to benefit the Palestinians themselves. This is from my side.
Great. شكرا كتير مؤيد. I'll maybe start with the panelists if anyone wants to start and then turn to the room. Please.
I will just briefly say a little bit about government's role. Certainly, an assessment of the technologies that we have, I think, is primary. Right now, we can actually people are genetically modifying microbes in soil. Like, is that really what we need to be doing? And it seems like that is a very dangerous thing to do. And so when we come to thinking about these technologies, a real assessment is necessary. There's currently an issue between the United States and Mexico regarding genetically engineered corn. And this comes through the free trade agreements. So this is something that needs to be reformed so that one country doesn't force another country to take an agriculture product that it doesn't want. And this comes through, again, the assessment of this genetic engineered corn process where some science says that it's safe to eat, but some science says it is very dangerous to our biodiversity and to and to our future food security. Certainly, we know that the traditional corn varieties would be very much at risk if they were contaminated with such a thing. So that's just one example of the kinds of action that have been taken around the world to address a certain kind of technology. And that shows why an assessment, a real assessment of the whole life stream of a technology is important to address.
So I'm conscious of time. We are scheduled, we will end at 9:45. So I'm gonna take just two comments, questions. Please introduce yourself, make it brief, and then we'll wrap up. I see a lot of men raising their hands. Just take a moment, raise them high. I have really bad eyesight. I see you, Musa, one more. Okay, so we're gonna do Musa and the gentleman in the blue, and then we'll see, maybe we'll sneak you in. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I am audible. I am Musa Sow from the Gambia, second Vice President of ROPA. My issue here is basically we are not sort of experts, on data collection, but then the people who serve as focal persons for farmers, farmer organizations, we also don't have the capacity to adopt and deliver relevant information, particularly if it has to be digitalized data. My question is, how can farmers be put in the center of data collection in the agriculture and make sure they are not exploited in that process? That's my question.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Patrick Mahan. I'm a humanitarian field worker, and I'm also a smallholder farmer. I suppose I want to try and bring it back more to the right to food and governance on data and how we use that data and our obligation to act. So, for example, in IPC, people in IPC 3, 4, and 5, for example, extreme food insecurity, we have that data, but we're not acting on that data. And there is an obligation to act. So I suppose that's just the point I'd like to make.
So we do have one more in the gray sweater. Tommaso, please.
Thanks a lot. Tommaso Ferrando from FIAN Belgium. Just a quick remark, because we have been talking about convergences, and I think that we cannot talk about data without talking about the minerals that make the data possible and climate change and the impact that data and digitalizations are provoking. So in terms of convergence and talking with other platforms, I think that is crucial. But going back to the idea of the political question, I have another political question for you. So how do we engage meaningfully with governments that use words like competitiveness, effectiveness, efficiency, entrepreneurialism? What are the arguments that we can use? Because I think that all of us, we kind of have a sense of what the negative implications can be, but it seems that there are certain governments and certain actors that are not listening or they do not want to listen. So how can we start that political questions without kind of just polarizing and being put in a corner and ignored, and as unfortunately has been happening for some time?
Great, thank you. And yeah, please introduce yourself.
Hala Barakat, CSIPM member. I'm from Egypt. And I mean, my point here is a bit what Her Excellency was presenting. I think we also need to see examples of successful benefit sharing. I have a big question mark about how this would work. Okay. Also, we talked about indigenous peoples, and that's a knowledge that's been transformed into data. Data becomes information and goes back to them to be used And so it's a bit of a cycle that's closed, and we need to see how to deal with every point in this cycle. So benefit sharing, we've always talked about prior free and informed consent. We also need to see how this works before we can put forward. So the question here is really, has it worked properly? Has this consent have been able to apply it? And are we fast enough? Corporates are much faster usually. So we need to take these examples to see. The other side is about also people under occupation, and here a double-edged sword, where it's important to have the data, and the other side need to be fast to decide who's going to be using this data and for what purpose. And I think Muayyad presented 2 points very important. The goals have to be clear, and the benefits have to go back to the people. It's very difficult to control it, but we need to see examples of how this happened. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I'll do is give the panelists maybe 1 minute if you want to, and I'll just give you time to reflect. So we've heard, what I appreciate is 3 very excellent political questions. How can farmers, and I would broaden it to peasants and small food holders and indigenous people and pastoralists and fishers, be put at the center? How can we act on data? Okay, we have it. Sometimes it's actually free and accessible occasionally. What do we do with this important data sometimes? And the third question, how do we engage with governments in a meaningful way? How do we make governments aware also that there is infrastructure behind how all of this happens? There is still extraction, even if we're talking of technology that might be sold to us as green. And then there's a question of how do we look at examples of successful benefit sharing and understanding all the different ways that knowledge, data, and information is created. So I'll turn it maybe just 1 minute if you want, you don't have to.
En base a las preguntas que se ha hecho, yo creo que también es bueno hablar de las experiencias. Por lo menos nosotros, el pueblo Cuna, hacemos nuestras reuniones en colectivos para tomar una determinación de lo que quiere el gobierno en su momento, algún proyecto que quieran implementar dentro de nuestras comunidades. Nosotros, a pesar de que el país no ha ratificado el consentimiento libre, previo, informado, ellos tienen que consultarnos a nosotros antes de ejecutar algún trabajo. Nosotros, y en las repercusiones, de repente hay situaciones. Nosotros tenemos una fibra óptica que pasa por nuestro territorio, que en un momento se hizo una negociación, pero si lo vemos, no obtuvimos ganancia, porque si lo vemos en a nivel digital, no hay cobertura de informática a nivel de toda la comarca. O sea, utilizaron y se han ganado millones durante todos los años que han estado dentro de esta fibra. ¿Y a nosotros qué nos han dado? ¿Qué nos han ofrecido para que las poblaciones tengan este avance digital? Entonces, por eso que nosotros siempre estamos poniendo hincapié en esta parte de los datos. Nosotros las comunidades tenemos todo el poder para definir qué es lo que queremos, qué es lo que vamos a obtener, qué es lo que vamos a ofrecer. Somos nosotros el centro de la información. El poder global quiere el conocimiento de nosotros. Debemos saber si el conocimiento es para las grandes empresas, las corporaciones, las élites, o son para las comunidades. Porque si son para ellos, ¿qué se refleja en nosotros? Por eso hay tanta inseguridad alimentaria y por eso nosotros luchamos por nuestra soberanía alimentaria. ¿Por qué? Porque no solamente somos los pueblos indígenas, también están los campesinos, las campesinas, las pescadoras, los pescadores, los productores, todos estos conocimientos que tenemos desde los tiempos anteriores hasta ahora. Entonces, por eso es importante que veamos hasta dónde hay ese reflejo de oportunidades. Recientemente podemos hablar de que Panamá ahora mismo está pasando por una etapa difícil. Se aprobó recientemente un contrato minero dentro de la Asamblea y sancionado en menos de 48 horas. y ahora mismo ha convulsionado el país, porque ¿qué es la minería? ¿Qué hace? Destrucción del medio ambiente a cielo abierto. Y no solamente repercute el lugar donde está, sino es a nivel nacional, que no todo lo veamos o que no lo observamos, que no lo analizamos, es algo que se pueda dar también por el tema que se le está ofreciendo, porque hay muchas formas de vender estos tipos de trabajo para recopilar los datos y destruir nuestro ambiente. Entonces, para eso es importante nosotros todo esto de ver eso con pinza y la importancia, como vuelvo y repito, de la gobernanza. Gracias.
Insisto en dos temas. Uno, el acceso universal a las tecnologías de telecomunicación e Internet para la población rural, para los agricultores, los campesinos, los pescadores en pequeña escala. De no asegurar esto, todo lo demás que hablemos solamente profundizará la desigualdad existente. Segundo tema es la regulación de los datos a nivel de los estados, considerando como los datos como un bien público, como un elemento de la gobernabilidad y la seguridad nacional, pero también a nivel global generar una gobernabilidad que parta de que los datos no son una mercancía, sino son bienes públicos que deben regularse y regirse por el interés de lo público y estar bajo control democrático de los pueblos, de las naciones. Esos dos puntos quisiera enfatizar.
Thank you, everyone. So just to wrap up, maybe what I'll do is I'll share what I've learned today. And I've learned a lot. I've been taking lots of notes. And something I've been learning from others who are more experienced in this area than I have is what I've been told is, one way to understand the difference between knowledge, data, and information maybe isn't knowledge gets turned into data, gets turned into information. That's how I used to think about it. Think of each as a different set of relationships that produces a different way of understanding the world and a different framework of action. But I still don't know the differences. But if I could just share out loud with you. If we think about knowledge, we think about seeds. Seeds is where we have a lot of our traditional knowledge, whether it's indigenous peoples or rural peoples, but all peoples. Without seeds, there's no life. So I always use seeds as a way to understand knowledge. Knowledge is created, produced through relationships between people. It's a shared, and we share and exchange knowledge, and it's based on our learning from experience. And it deals with pragmatic questions. And so the context of knowledge is always front and center. Knowledge comes and it tells you, it's the cosmology that it's coming from. Knowledge comes with the context front and center. Data it's not that we take knowledge and we turn it into data. Data comes from a different set of relationships where we may not know who we're working with. We've all just produced data for social media. That's the relationship. It's abstract. It's as if there's a machine sucking out our experiences and repackaging it in a way that we don't have access to. So I like to think of it, and if I can share, from the experience we all fought for on the indigenous right for free, prior, and informed consent, and to go back to where Tayana started today. In the policy instrument, not to bring it down to something as exciting as a policy instrument, but they tried to put, they put in that word, what was it, as applicable. This is meaningless. I believe the legal term for it is it's bullshit. Indigenous peoples' right for free and prior and informed consent is not just recognized in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It is from their right to self-determination. It is inherent in who they are. We don't need anything to tell us that. So when is free and prior informed consent not applicable? Never. What that tells me, and this is what I've learned today, is that people have the power. The companies act if they're going to come and sell us this new technology and it's going to change the world, but they need the people more than we need them. And it's people's ability to organize and organize their power and mobilize their knowledge and mobilize their own data and mobilize their own information. And I think what I'm learning today is to remember that part of what we learn from our Indigenous brothers and sisters is the right to say no, to slow it down. There's nothing wrong to tell all of this, the data. What makes data unique today is the speed and the size of it. Big data is almost redundant. Everything is big data now. And there's a power in slowing it down to have the correct conversations in the correct way at the correct time when the people are ready. And I think that's what I've been learning today. And I want to thank everyone on the panel and I want to thank Muayyad in Palestine. Thank you, everybody.